Hello, friends around the world, and here. I'm Rob, and this is the first time I've ever given a talk in a cave before, and I hope it won't be the last, because caves are definitely underrated as places for such things. I was asked if I would talk a little bit about the future and about the context maybe of why we're having this conversation. So for me, it feels really important to put this day and what we're doing here in the context of the wider situation, the wider emergency happening in the world, in terms of climate change in particular. The fact that since our ancient ancestors lived in spaces like this, quite possibly this one, up until about 150 years ago, everything that we associated with humanity, from the emergence of agriculture, the building of the pyramids, the emergence and collapse of all the great civilizations, all the way up until around the time Van Gogh painted the sunflowers, we lived in this very stable climate, our safe operating space as a species, where the concentration of CO2 never went above 300 parts per million, and we had little changes, but it was stable. That's our space. That's the space in which human civilization has emerged and flourished. And in the last 150, 100, 200 years, since the discovery of fossil fuels, we have broken out of that space into really uncharted territory. We've already gone up nearly 1.5 degrees from where we were before, and we're seeing the impacts all around the world. I'm sure everybody who has joined us here today physically, everybody who's joined us online will be able to point to things that they are observing where they live, whether it's floods, whether it's hot summers, whether it's storms that are getting more and more intense. And that's being driven by the way that we, particularly those of us in the wealthier, affluent global north, are living, and the need to massively address that. And we know that at the moment in France, I think the average, we put out 9 tons of CO2 a year. We need to get that down to 1 in about the next 30 years. It's a huge change that needs to happen. And the point is that we can either be the people, we can be the generation who go, oh, that's too hard. Oh, I don't think we should do that. I think it sounds like a lot of effort and it'll cost too much money and maybe we shouldn't bother. Or to be the people who go, wow, we are alive at a moment in history where we get to reimagine everything. What an incredible opportunity, what an incredible blessing that is. So the work that I do is really about trying to helps to support that to happen by talking about longing. And for me, longing is such a vitally important aspect of what we do. And I'm part of many different climate movements over the years, often who seem to think that if we just talk about extinction and we talk about collapse, somehow that's going to be enough, and it's absolutely not. And what we need to do is to tap into people's longing. And my favorite, I have I'm sure most of you will have read Alice in Wonderland, and there's a beautiful passage in Alice in Wonderland which speaks so beautifully to longing. If I can find it. So you may remember the bit where Alice is in the corridor and she's too big because she's drunk the thing that makes her really big, and there's a door and she can see a garden in that door and she wants to get in there more than anything else. Alice opened the door and found it led to a small passage, not much larger than a rat hole. She knelt down and looked along the passage and into the loveliest garden you ever saw. How she longed to get out of that dark hall and wander about among those beds of bright flowers and those cool fountains, but she could not even get her head through the doorway. And even if my head would go through, thought poor Alice, it would be of very little use without my shoulders. Oh, how I wish I could shut up like a telescope. I think I could, if only I knew how to begin. And I feel like if we can talk about and bring alive a future that we need to create a radically lower carbon, more social, more local, more resilient future in the way that has that allure, like that garden that she's looking at. That's really what we need to do. So a lot of the work that I've found a big shift in what I do from being we need to inform people about climate change to being we need to cultivate longing. And the cultivation of longing is something that needs artists and designers and storytellers, because they're the people in our culture who create longing, right? Climate scientists are rubbish at creating longing. Engineers are rubbish at creating longing, to generalize. But actually, artists, storytellers, poets, they're the people who can do that. So a lot of the work that I do is about helping people to time travel. So the book that I'm writing at the moment, which is called How to Fall in Love with the Future, Time Travel as a Tool for Activists. Because I feel like the activism that inspires me most at the moment is the people who are being fluid with time, who help us step into the future in order to understand the past and just to move between those two things in a really kind of a playful way. So what I wanted to do was to read you the first couple of pages of what I'm writing, which is about time traveling to 2030. And the reason I talk about 2030 is because people talk about utopia all the time. Well, let's imagine the utopia, perfect world in 200 years. I'm not interested in that at all. What interests me is we know that by 2030, we in the western part of the wealthy parts of the world have to have cut our emissions in half by 2030. That's a huge task, right? But what would it be like to be there? It's not perfect. It's not utopia. It's also not a dystopia, but we're on the way. Things are changing. Things are moving in the right direction. How can we help people to imagine what that world would be like? So I want to just read you a little bit, which is about myself and my friend time traveling to 2030 and our first impressions of that world. Traveling through time was disorientating the first few times I did it. But I feel as though I've got the hang of it by now. Just as sailors get their sea legs, I've got my time legs. There's a beautiful phenomenon you notice as a time traveler, whereby once you start to accelerate through time, once the years start to really fly past, you see a kind of rainbow halo effect through the portholes, a shimmering mirage that causes me to pause my delicate calibrations of the disbelief suspenders, to take a minute just to take in the majesty of it. It's a bit like the Northern Lights, but in a full spectrum of colours. I'd love to show it to you one day. I'm travelling with my colleague, Mr. Kit. I'll introduce you to him later, as we make one of our expeditions to document the future, to take photos and make audio recordings to bring back with us. As we approach 2030 and begin to slow down and descend, I always get goosebumps, a nervous frisson as we touch down. There are, of course, an infinite number of possible futures that lie ahead of us, like threads stretching out into the distance. We've explored some of the nightmare ones, and believe me, we don't want to go there. Trust me on that. However, since we perfected the design of our cynicism overrider circuits a couple of months ago, we've been able to follow the quantum threads to the 2030 that resulted from our doing everything we could have possibly done. It's no utopia, but it's no dystopia either. It's a future that's work in progress, but damn, it's amazing work in progress. Once we've landed, I pop open the hatch and we step out. We've grown quite good at finding discreet places to land so nobody sees us arrive and depart. This time, we are in a residential city street, pretty nondescript, yet the transformation it has undergone in recent years is remarkable to see. There are three initial impressions that always strike anyone who travels to this 2030. The first is how the air smells. It's so much cleaner than what we were breathing back in the present due to the rapid decline in car use, the rapid phase out of fossil fuels, the concerted efforts to clean the city's air. It smells like that first evening when spring starts to smell like summer. but it's more complex than that. It's hard to disentangle the different smells that combine in what I'm inhaling. In deep and deliberate sniffs, in the way a sommelier might savor a fine wine, I begin to unpack and identify different nuances and aromas. I recognize thyme and lavender and a Caribbean herb that's become very fashionable to grow in recent years called broadleaf thyme or Spanish oregano. The air smells like growing things. It smells like honey filling you up, like damp earth, like cut grass, like a forest. It smells of food being cooked. It smells like flowers, intoxicating, delicious. The second thing you notice is the bird song. It's much louder than what we left behind, but also much more complex. It's a bit disorienting the first time you hear it. There are birds in there whose beautiful serenades I don't recognize. I'm spellbound. In this future, prizes are awarded to different urban communities for the diversity and complexity of their bird song, meaning great efforts are gone to in enhancing habitats, putting up bird boxes, creating the best conditions for bird populations to flourish. The complete ban just 2 years out from the present we've left behind of pesticides and herbicides played a big role in making this possible. Some neighborhoods have even become renowned for particular species of birds. And at certain times of year, people travel across the city just to listen to them. Residents now allow the birds to be their alarm clocks. Oh, got back up. Something only made possible because of how much louder they are. This city can sometimes feel like an aviary with houses in it. Groups of nighttime revelers are known to finish their evenings by heading to one particular part of the city where the nightingales have returned, where they stand slightly blearily, bathing in the entrancing and melodious song that envelops them. It has been known to move people to tears. What a way to end the evening. One huge factor that made the birdsong so much more noticeable is the huge decline in car numbers in this city. The score of our lives is no longer the constant hum of the internal combustion engine, which used to mask so much, rather the sounds and symphonies that emerge out of nature when we make it possible for us to hear it. We hear the world around us in so much subtlety and detail, a far greater granularity. I'm aware that I'm hearing much more laughter than I did in the world I left behind, and I hear sounds of children playing coming from many different directions. The third impression is the look in people's eyes. People hold you in friendly and curious eye contact as they pass. It may be, of course, that they are fascinated by our time travelers' costumes, white all-in-one suits designed not to protect us, but to protect them from any residual present-day despondency and cynicism we may have inadvertently brought with us. But there's more to it than that. The other important part of our time traveler training is to not do any past-splaining. Not saying anything like, that's never going to work, or undermining their growing confidence in what's unfolding around them. There's now a shared sense of excitement, a sense of we might just do this that was missing in the world that we've traveled from. It feels as though much of the anxiety, tension, and despair so familiar back in the present has lifted. People feel part of a historic shift that's happening around them, and they're thrilled to see it. They seem to have discovered that when you find yourself doing something that you love, you have so much more energy, determination, and clarity than you could ever have imagined. People feel part of a team. They seem less guarded, less hurried, more urgent, more open. Less urgent, more open. The word that keeps coming to my mind is dignity. People move with a sense of belief, and it's beautiful to see. It feels like it's thriving. So for me, I do a lot of working around this idea of the future, and I did a podcast for a few years, and every episode we would start by inviting the two guests into the time machine, and we would travel to 2030. So rather than having a discussion about is a universal basic income a good idea, we would travel to 2030 where there'd already been one for 7 years. how does the air smell differently? How can you tell that this change has happened? And so what I did in this writing is to stitch together all of the things that they said that they saw from the future, and it feels like such a powerful thing to do, and something that I like to do a lot of in the work that I'm involved with. Oh yeah, and so a few years ago, during COVID, I saw a picture of a young woman at one of the Black Lives Matter protests in Washington, and she was wearing a T-shirt which said, "I've been to the future, we won." And when I saw it, it kind of gave me goosebumps, and I thought, what a just beautiful way of looking at this. We could just talk about collapse and extinction and look at all of that stuff and try and think that that might actually bring change about. But how different is it to help people to have that experience of, I've been to the future, it's amazing, let me tell you all about it. And so building spaces where people can experience stepping into the future in that way is such a powerful thing to do, I think. What was the last thing I was going to say to you? Yes, there's a bit, the other bit that I want to read you is just at the end, which is where I reflect on where it would be really lovely to end up, like in terms of activism, what our activism might look like. And if we continue just sort of, obviously we need the work in the context of the climate emergency. We need the people who put their bodies in the way and to stop the things that are happening. And that's absolutely vital. But I wonder if this might also be something that we might see. A call goes out across the country for a day of summoning the future to the capital. A huge mobilization inviting people to surround Parliament with things that for them symbolize the future that they long for. It taps into a huge diversity of movements for change, as well as artists, writers, actors, farmers, renewable energy installers, each of whom bring a living, breathing, interactive vision of the future to the streets. Some bring a plant or some fruit they've grown, furniture they've made, musical instruments, their children, toy beavers. They take the time to share with each other what that object represents, the hope that it embodies. Young people initially mobilized by Fridays for the Future marches bring often very moving representations of the future they long to see, the dreams they cling to and are determined to see realized. Afrofuturists bring color, art, story, music, and a deep embodied sense of what a future rooted in Afrofuturism would look like. Actors perform short pieces that speak to the future of their longing. Food campaigners cook thousands of free meals which they give out to people. Others bring trees and position them where a city with more complete urban canopy would have trees. One group sets up a 2030 employment agency, highlighting the huge number of new jobs this future has created. Teachers from across the country gather to celebrate the new curriculum of 2030, the ending of testing, a new era of creative education that has just begun. Imagination activists from local authorities across the country meet to share their reimagining of local government. There's dedicated space for children's play. It feels like an absolutely safe and inclusive space for women, people of colour, LGBTQ+ and trans people, just as that future will be. A huge, vibrant, dazzling time portal has been opened that allows many thousands of people to step in and experience it. Every workshop begins with the words, "Here in 2030." Tour guides take people on imaginary tours of nearby streets, conjuring up in their imaginations what it now feels like to walk through 2030. It's a day that's thrilling, that deeply touches people, that confounds the media with its brazenly positive vision of how the future could be and the joy people experience in the streets. And just the last thing I wanted to mention was there's a woman here in France called Anaïg Plassard, who lives in Nantes and who's originally from Brittany, from Plabennec in Brittany, and who's been very inspired by the time travel work that I do and things that I write about time travel, and this very, very silly picture that we did of me in my time travel costume. There you are for people who would like to see that. And she's made a film for French TV, which is called Return to Plavenec, where she goes to the town that she was born in, and she rides through the town on a horse with a sign that says, "I've been to the future, we won," in French, obviously. And last week, all across France, there were big demonstrations around the Front Populaire. And in Nantes, there was a big demonstration there, and she went to this demonstration wearing her time traveler's suit, her silver suit, and her time traveler's helmet, and her sign saying, "I've been to the future, we won." And it was all over social media. She was on the TV, it was in the newspapers, because there's something about summoning into the present the future that we long for, that I think really, really calls to people and speaks to people. And right now, when we see the rise across Europe and across the world of very dangerous political forces which have emerged because those of us on the left or more progressive people have stopped talking about the future. We don't talk about the future anymore. Since the 1960s, when we had Martin Luther King and people who talked about the future and talked about dreams, no one does that anymore. No one's done that since the 1970s. And when we don't do that, what happens is horrible people say, "Oh, the future looks very scary. We'll protect you from that because we're really strong." And so it's more important than ever that in the work that we do, whatever form that takes, that we bring alive the longing, the desire. We speak to the future. We bring it alive in color, in taste and smell. We give people those experiences to step into the future. As the great American writer Bell Hooks once said, "What we cannot imagine cannot come into being." And so I really, for me, as we sit in this cave and we think of the world outside and all the troubles and difficulties that it faces and things that are emerging, there are many tools that we have at our disposal for what to do about it. But I think the imagination and time travel and storytelling are some of the most powerful tools that we have, and we all need to get much, much better at it. And that's all I was going to say. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you. I'll just say one little thing that I when I was been working on writing this for ages, and I sent it to a woman who I know who's called a book doula, who basically helps people to write books, and she's brilliant, and I really respect her opinion. And I sent what I'd written to her, and she wrote back and said, no, that's not it. She said, you're writing a book called How to Fall in Love with the Future, and I don't feel like I've fallen in love with the future. You need to start by helping. So I wrote the passage that I read to you at the beginning about arriving into 2030. And then I rang her up. I said, I've written something. Is this the kind of thing you're thinking? And I got to the end of it, and she had tears pouring down her face. And she said, "Yeah, that's so that's nice feedback to get."